In the shadowy corner of a rescue shelter, a gaunt German shepherd trembled uncontrollably, eyes squeezed shut as if to erase a world of torment it had always known. No one could approach, every attempt drowned in sheer panic, until a shelter worker arrived, doing something so bizarre it left everyone stunned. What would become of this broken creature? Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. Thank you. Lila Harper eased her car into the lot of Hope Refuge Center, stepping out into the brisk dawn breeze. The sun peeked over the horizon, stretching faint shadows across the asphalt. She expected this shift to mirror the usual routine, but as she crossed the threshold, the expression on Jacob Ellis's face stopped her cold. The shelter's head, a veteran of countless grim rescues, wore a troubled frown. "We've got a rough case today," he grumbled, kneading the nape of his neck. Lila's brow knit. "How rough?" Jacob paused, then gestured for her to trail him. "Take a look yourself." She moved through the kennel aisles, the usual chorus of barks and whimpers buzzing around her. Yet at the hallway's end, an eerie quiet reigned. She halted before a compact, solitary pen. There he crouched, a gaunt German shepherd, balled up tight in the deepest nook, quivering without cease. His coat was ragged, ribs jutting beneath his hide. His ears lay pinned to his head, his muzzle so close to the floor he seemed to wish himself unseen. Lila's chest constricted. "He hasn't budged since arrival," Jacob murmured. "No food, no water. Won't let a soul near." Lila knelt, her fingers brushing lightly against the wire mesh. "What's his background?" Jacob let out a heavy breath. "One of the nastiest neglect cases we've had. A backyard breeder, kept in a squalid tiny crate his whole life. No human contact, no kindness, just pain." Lila's throat caught. She could tell, the way Jasper shook, avoiding her gaze, recoiling at every sound. This wasn't mere timidity, it was a creature molded by misery. She inhaled deeply. "Anyone tried reaching out to him?" Jacob dipped his head. "Sure, but..." He blew out a sharp gust, shaking his head. "He freaks out, gasping, trembling harder, like he's collapsing inward. Frankly, I'm not sure he'll ever recover." Lila held her tongue for a beat. Then, defying expectation, she eased herself onto the ground. Not by the gate, not stretching toward him, just settling there. Jacob's forehead creased. "What's your plan?" Lila's gaze stayed fixed on Jasper. "I'm biding my time." Jacob snorted. "Biding for what?" Her tone remained firm. "For him to see I'm no threat." Jacob sighed. "You'll be sitting there all day." She nodded. "Then I'll sit here all day." Jasper didn't move, didn't look at her, didn't react at all. But Luna stayed. Minutes passed, then an hour, then two. Still, Jasper remained curled in his corner, his body tense, his entire world reduced to fear. But Luna? She wasn't going anywhere, because she knew the first step to healing was trust, and she was willing to wait. Luna sat on the cold shelter floor, her legs folded beneath her, her hands resting lightly on her knees. Hours had passed since she first positioned herself in front of Jasper's kennel, and yet she had barely moved. The rescue center had gone through its usual daily rhythm. Volunteers came and went. Dogs were walked. Potential adopters passed through. But none of that mattered to Luna. Her focus was locked on the trembling German shepherd huddled in the farthest corner of his kennel. Jasper still hadn't moved. He was curled in on himself, his ribs visible beneath his thin coat, his head lowered so much that his nose nearly touched the concrete. His body trembled like a leaf caught in the wind, an endless quake of fear that refused to stop. But there was one difference. Luna noticed it immediately. Jasper's ears weren't clamped tight against his head anymore. They hung low, cautious still, yet hinted at something new, alertness. He sensed her presence. Jacob Ellis strolled past, pausing briefly to shoot her a weary glance with a frustrated huff. "You're still parked here?" Luna kept her gaze forward, unfazed. "I said I'd stay as long as it takes." Jacob shook his head. "This pup's a hopeless case, Luna. I've witnessed it too often. He's locked up inside himself. Sitting there won't jolt him out of it. Luna didn't counter him. She didn't have to. Right then, Jasper's ears gave a faint twitch. Subtle, almost missable. But Luna caught it. She understood its weight. Jacob exhaled, massaging his brow. "You're a mule, you know that?" A faint grin tugged at Luna's lips, her eyes glued to Jasper. "I've heard harsher." Jacob let out a dry laugh. "Fine, just don't skip a meal. If you keel over by his cage, I'm not hauling you off." She gave a distracted nod, her entire focus riveted on the fragile, petrified creature before her. Time trickled by. Patience was her anchor. She had no choice. Now and then, distant barks rang through the shelter's corridors, each one sharpening Jasper's flinches. His quivers grew fiercer, eyes squeezing shut as if to vanish. Yet he never shifted farther from her. That alone marked a step forward. Luna could build on it. After what seemed an endless wait, the space hushed once more. Only the faint clink of metal dishes or a soft breeze outside broke the stillness. She let out a measured breath, deliberate and slow, then took her first action. Quietly, wordlessly, she slipped a hand into her jacket and drew out a modest chunk of cooked chicken. Its aroma wafted through the air. Jasper's nostrils flared. Luna set the morsel a few feet off, not too near, not too distant, just far enough that he'd need to edge toward her to claim it. Then she held still. Minutes ticked on. Jasper stayed rooted. Her breaths remained even, her stance loose. She wouldn't push him. The first move wasn't hers to make. It was his call. 5 more minutes, then 10. Then a quiet marvel unfolded. It started faint, a slight nudge of his forepaw, a quiver of his snout. Tremors still racked him, but he was testing the air. Luna's breath caught. Then with a caution so delicate it felt like time itself had stilled, Jasper crept closer. It was tiny, barely there, a lone paw scraping an inch nearer. Emotion gripped Luna's chest, but she stayed frozen. She couldn't risk it. A twitch, a sound, and he might shrink back. Another inch. Jasper's eyes darted up, a fleeting glance. Their stares locked. For the first time. In that brief, fragile instant, Luna glimpsed a spark beneath his dread. A query, a hesitant murmur from his shattered spirit. "Can I trust you?" Words stayed silent. She simply held her ground, there for him. At last, Jasper took another shaky step. His muzzle dipped, nearing the chicken scrap. A pause, a falter, then he grabbed it and darted back to his nook. Tears pricked Luna's eyes, her hands balling up on her thighs. It wasn't grand, not full faith yet, but today, for the first time ever, Jasper had chosen to approach a person. And that was monumental. The next dawn, Luna reached the shelter before the rest, the sun just teasing a golden glow through frosted panes. The halls lay calm, save for the soft stirrings of restless dogs. She drew a steadying breath before heading down the passage. Today was different. Today, she wasn't just hoping for progress. She was expecting it. Yesterday, Jasper had made a choice. He had moved toward her, however small the step may have been. That meant something. As she approached his kennel, she felt her pulse quicken. Would he still be curled in the corner, trembling like before? Or had something changed? She reached the enclosure and froze. Jasper was watching her, not curled into himself, not trembling as violently, just watching. Luna's heart tightened with emotion. Slowly, she sank onto the floor, mimicking her exact position from yesterday. Jasper didn't flinch. That alone was progress. The way he didn't retreat, the way his ears twitched in her direction. It was the start of something. Luna exhaled, steadying her emotions before carefully reaching into her coat pocket. She pulled out another small piece of chicken and placed it between them. Yesterday, it had taken him almost an hour to move toward her. Today, he hesitated for only a minute. His nose twitched. His ribs, still painfully visible, rose and fell with quickened breath. And then, he inched forward. One cautious step, then a second. His frame remained taut, uncertain, yet no longer rigid. He was in motion. Luna held her breath, eyes unblinking. Jasper dipped his muzzle. For a fleeting second, it looked like he might dart away again. But then he claimed the morsel. Deliberate, not frantic, not driven by dread. Luna's throat tightened, her body statue still. Gently she rotated her hand, palm up, an offering. Jasper halted, the chicken still gripped in his jaws, his gaze darting between her open hand and the ground. Time stretched, nothing stirred. Then came the moment she'd longed for. Jasper edged toward her fingers, just a whisper of movement, but enough for his whiskers to graze her skin. Luna's chest caught. She didn't recoil, didn't shift. As swiftly as he'd neared, he withdrew a step. Luna brushed aside any letdown. Today, Jasper had chosen to come closer, and that was monumental. A quiet smile curved her lips, her voice a murmur. "You're so strong, pal." Jasper's ears flicked at her words. Then for the first time, his tail gave a faint twitch. Slight, tentative, almost invisible. But Luna noticed, and for the first time since their paths crossed, hope bloomed within her. This was just the start. The following dawn, Luna arrived at the shelter with fresh resolve. Jasper had advanced, a true intentional stride. Last night, replaying it in her mind, she fixated on that subtle quiver. His tail had stirred. It was small, nearly imperceptible, yet it carried immense weight. Nearing his pen, she spotted a shift. Jasper's eyes were already on her, not huddled in the corner, not quaking as fiercely. His ears, once plastered to his head, now stood perked, attuned. Luna's heart lifted. She settled into her familiar place on the floor, legs folded. Jasper didn't shy away. That alone signaled growth. She slipped a hand into her pocket, retrieving a modest chicken scrap, and set it between them. This time Jasper paused mere moments. Then with measured care, he crept forward, one step, then another. Luna stayed motionless, her posture easy, her breaths steady. Jasper's nostrils flared as he sampled the scent. But rather than snatching it and fleeing, he studied her hand, a wordless inquiry, a gauge of faith. Luna's throat caught. Deliberately, she lifted her palm, a gesture of welcome. Jasper stiffened, and she could nearly feel the inner tug of war, doubt wrestling with wonder. For a drawn-out beat, he lingered. Then he chose. Jasper tilted forward, his whiskers teasing her skin. Luna's breath snagged. Then came the wonder she'd awaited. Jasper nudged his nose into her hand, not by chance, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Luna felt tears sting her eyes. She kept still, letting him take the lead. And then, another step. Jasper lowered his head slightly, his muzzle touching her skin. Luna's heart pounded. Slowly, gently, she moved her fingers, brushing them against his fur. Jasper flinched, just for a second, but he didn't pull away. Her fingertips skimmed over his snout, barely touching, but enough for him to feel that this was different. This wasn't pain. This wasn't cruelty. This was kindness. For the first time in his life, Jasper had let a human touch him, and Luna knew. There was no turning back now. The next morning, Luna arrived at the shelter before sunrise. The air was crisp, and the world outside was still covered in a thin layer of frost. The shelter was quiet, with only the faint rustling of dogs shifting in their kennels as they stirred awake. But Luna wasn't thinking about the other dogs. Her mind was fixed on Jasper. Yesterday, he had let her touch him. For the first time, he had chosen to trust a human, even if just for a moment. Would today bring another step forward, or would fear pull him back again? She walked through the hallways, her pulse quickening as she neared his enclosure. Then she saw him, and her breath hitched. Jasper wasn't pressed into the farthest corner. He was waiting. His body was still tense, still thin and fragile. But he was sitting up now, his ears half raised, his dark eyes fixed on her. He had been expecting her. Luna swallowed the lump in her throat. Slowly, she sank onto the floor, just as she had done every day before. And Jasper? He didn't flinch. That in itself was a victory. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out another small piece of chicken. But this time, instead of placing it between them, she held it in her open palm. A test. Would he take it? Jasper's nose twitched, his body still tense. His ribs, though still visible, moved with steady breaths. He stared at the food, then at Luna's hand. Another battle played out in his mind. Fear versus trust. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then ever so slowly, Jasper inched forward. One paw, then another. Luna held perfectly still. Jasper lowered his head. His nose brushed against her fingers. Then he took the food. Not in a panic, not in fear, but calmly. Luna felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. This was real progress. Jasper was choosing to trust her. But just as she was about to speak, a loud bang echoed through the shelter. A door slamming, a voice shouting. Jasper's entire body jerked, his ears pinned back, his tail tucked, his breathing turned rapid and shallow. Luna watched in horror as the progress she had made crumbled before her eyes. Jasper bolted back into his corner. His body shrank into itself, shaking violently. His eyes darted around the room, filled with sheer terror. Luna's chest tightened painfully. She knew this reaction. It wasn't just fear, it was memory. Something about that noise, that sudden sharp sound. It reminded him of something from his past, something bad. Luna took a slow, careful breath. She couldn't let panic take over. She had to be calm. "It's okay, Jasper," she whispered, her voice as steady as she could make it. Jasper didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Luna sat back. She had a choice. She could leave, give him space, let him calm down on his own. Or she could stay, show him that this time he wasn't alone. So she stayed. Minutes passed, then an hour. She never moved closer, never spoke again. Just stayed. And after what felt like forever, Jasper lifted his head. His eyes flickered to her, still filled with uncertainty. But there was something else there, something different. He had felt fear, but this time he had seen something else too. Luna hadn't left, and maybe, just maybe, she never would. The next morning, Luna arrived at the shelter with a mix of hope and worry swirling inside her chest. Yesterday had been a breakthrough. Jasper had taken food directly from her hand. But then, in an instant, fear had stolen it all away. A loud noise, a bad memory, a moment of sheer terror. And just like that, he had shut down again. Luna knew that trauma wasn't something that disappeared overnight. She also knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't give up on him. As she approached his kennel, she braced herself for what she might see. Would Jasper be curled back in his corner, trembling like before? Or would he remember that she had stayed? She stepped into view, and her breath caught in her throat. Jasper was sitting up. His body was still tense, but he wasn't pressed into the farthest corner. He was watching her, waiting. Her throat tightened with emotion. Slowly, she lowered herself onto the floor, and for the first time, Jasper didn't flinch. That was the sign she had been hoping for. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small piece of chicken. She hesitated for a second. Should she try to feed him by hand again? Would he trust her enough after yesterday's setback? She decided to test it. Carefully, she extended her palm, holding the food out for him. Jasper's ears twitched. His ribs still showed beneath his thin fur, his body still recovering from years of neglect. He hesitated, and then he took a step forward. Luna felt her pulse quicken. Another step. His breathing was slow but controlled. No panic, no trembling. And then, before she could process it, his nose brushed against her fingers, and he took the food, not in fear, not in desperation, but in trust. Luna blinked rapidly, forcing back the emotions swelling in her chest. She barely had time to react before Jasper did something that shattered every wall she thought he had. He lowered his head and gently pressed it against her open palm. A choice, a decision, a trust that wasn't forced, wasn't demanded, but freely given. Luna let out a slow, shaky breath. "You're amazing, buddy," she whispered. Jasper's tail flicked slightly, and for the first time he didn't pull away. The past still haunted him, but today he had taken his biggest step forward, and Luna knew he was ready for something more. The morning air was crisp as Luna pulled into the shelter parking lot. Today felt different. For weeks she had come to Jasper's kennel, sitting on the cold concrete floor, waiting for him to trust her, and yesterday he had chosen her, Not just by taking food from her hand, not just by stepping forward, but by pressing his head into her palm. It had been the first time Jasper had actively sought comfort from a human. It was a moment Luna would never forget. But now it was time to see if he was ready for the next step. She made her way through the shelter halls, pausing at his kennel, and what she saw nearly brought her to tears. Jasper was standing, not in fear, not in hesitation, but waiting. His eyes met hers. There was no flinching, no retreating to the corner, just recognition. Luna felt her throat tighten, but she didn't let the emotion overwhelm her. Instead, she did something she had never done before. She opened the kennel door, slowly, carefully. Jasper tensed, but didn't run. He watched. His ears perked up slightly. Luna kneeled, extending her hand again. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. Jasper's body stayed rigid, but he didn't back away. Luna took a deep breath. Then, for the first time ever, she patted her leg. An invitation, a test. Would he step out? For a long moment, Jasper didn't move. Luna didn't push him. She waited. Then, Jasper did something that shocked everyone in the shelter. He stepped forward, past the invisible boundary that had trapped him in fear for so long, past the space where he had spent days trembling in terror. He stepped toward Luna. Then, he stopped. His nose twitched, and he pressed his head into her chest. Luna let out a shaky breath, wrapping her arms around him. As he melted into her embrace, for the first time in his life, Jasper had found safety. He had found love. And this time, he knew it was real, because this time, he had chosen it. As I sit here reflecting on that dog's journey and the woman who turned his world around, I can't help but feel a little shiver in my chest. I used to wonder if anything could outmatch the deepest kind of fear. And then I saw it unfold, step by trembling step, touch by gentle touch, proving that love and patience can shatter any wall. Folks, this story isn't just about a dog finding safety. It's a reminder that every one of us deserves a chance to heal. If it hit you like it did me, drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. And if you're eager for more heart-stirring tales like this, hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel, give us a like, and share it to spread some hope. Thanks for being here with me. We'll catch up again in the next amazing story.